Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to talk about getting help with Linux. This is a subject that I have covered many times in the past, but we're up to 30,000 subscribers on this channel now, so it's a good time to go back over this stuff. And I'm going to give you some hints and some tips and some tricks as we roll along. There's not going to be anything visually interesting to this video other than this card that I have up here with my notes on it. So if you want to stick your earbuds in and listen to it on your mobile device, be my guest, go right ahead. You're not going to miss anything. A lot of folks tell me they like to listen to these videos. So I like to point out when it's a video that you're not going to see anything in. I spend a great deal of my time these days talking to people through email, through messages on Facebook. People contact me through easylinux.com through the contact page, and most of them are asking questions about problems that they're having with their Linux installation, or they want to know how to set up a certain program or configure it to do one thing or another. And I do try and help everybody that I talk to. I at least can point you in the right direction. So I've gotten pretty good myself at doing this, so I'm passing it along to you, especially if you are somebody who is just starting out your Linux journey. Then these are things that will help you as you go along. So the first thing that I have listed on my notes here is that you should read the manual or Google it first. If you run into a problem, you need to go look for documentation. All of the really good major distributions of Linux have excellent documentation online. Most of them have forums and wikis available on their web pages where you can search for information about various parts of the system and programs that you might be running on that system. So that's the first place to look. Linux Mint, a lot of you guys are starting with Linux Mint. I think it's an excellent place to start. They have an online manual that you can click on. They've got a link to it in the welcome screen. There's a link to it in the menu. That manual is really pretty good. It's only about 52 pages long, and it doesn't really take that long to read. So if you're just starting out, go get that manual and read through it and take notes, and you will find that it'll be a lot easier when you actually go to install your system because, hey, you're already somewhat familiar with it. When you go to Google to look for information, it gets a little bit tricky because you're dealing with the entire internet. There's a lot of information out there, and some of it is old or incorrect. So when you're doing that, you want to be looking for answers that relate to your distribution of Linux specifically. If you are using Linux Mint, then you will want to, oh, I see the people across the street have cranked up the sandblaster, so here we go. Got some maintenance going on, and so it's going to sound like there's a jet engine in the background, and there's not a thing that I can do about it. Anyway, look for answers that relate to your distribution, and look for things that relate to the current version of your distribution. And when you're reading those answers, whether they're on a forum or in a web page or whatever, make sure that they're solutions and they're not just statements of a problem. You'll see that a lot in forums where you will be reading something, you'll find your particular problem, and then you'll scroll down and you'll see that nobody is offering any solutions that work. So look for things that are marked solved. Look for things that have something on them where somebody says, hey, that worked for me. And then you know you're getting some accurate information. Be very careful about outdated info. There is a lot of old information about Ubuntu, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, Arch Linux, any distribution that's been around for a long time, and that's out there on the web. And anything that you find for Ubuntu 9.04, for instance, or something from Ubuntu that's got a date on it of 2008 is not necessarily going to work with the modern Ubuntu. The system has changed quite a bit through the years. If it is a very, very, very generalized thing, it may apply, but make sure that you go through those posts and see where somebody has posted, hey, this works on Ubuntu 16.04 or whatever current version you happen to be using. That can cause a problem because, like I said, the system has changed a lot, and some of the things that people might tell you to tweak aren't either aren't there or do not apply anymore. And so if you can find an answer to your question just by Googling it or reading the manual, that is great. But we all run into a situation every now and again where we cannot find a specific answer that works, or it's just the answers that we do find are so confusing that I don't know what to do with it. At that point, you should ask in a forum, and whatever distribution of Linux you happen to be running. So if you are on Linux Mint, you want to be a part of their forum. If you want to be running Ubuntu, then you want to be a part of their forum. If you're running Arch, you want to look in their forums first. Don't assume that something that works for Ubuntu is going to work for Linux Mint or vice versa. Ubuntu does use a great deal of or rather Linux Mint uses a great deal of the Ubuntu system. This is true, but that information doesn't necessarily apply because Linux Mint changes a lot of things when they redistribute the parts of the system that come from Ubuntu. When you do post in a forum, give as much information as you can, and that means be very specific. People need to know what computer you're using. If it's a problem with your video card, it's a good idea to put the exact model number of that video card. Make sure that you have as much detailed information as you can. And also, if you have found information that didn't work, you can put a link to that. This is what I found, but it's not working for me. The more information that you give the person who is going to try and answer your question in the forum, the better a chance that you have of getting an answer that will actually work for you. But on the flip side of that, you do not want to send out too much information. I get a lot of emails from people where they're asking about a specific issue, and then they have 5, 6, 7 paragraphs of information, and a lot of it doesn't apply to that particular problem. And the problem with that is that I'm going to try and read that, because if you send me an email, I'm going to read it, but I may have to put you off because it's a priority thing. If somebody sends me something that's really, really, really long, then if I have 14 other things to get through, you're going to be last in line. So you want to make sure that you give information that relates directly to your problem, to your hardware, to your distribution, but at the same time, don't overdo it. Just define the problem as best you can, and then if the person asks for more information, then there you go. And you want to make sure that you point out the fact that you have researched this first, because if you go into a forum and you ask a very simple question that those who volunteer to answer people's questions in those forums are going to know immediately that you could have found with a simple Google search, you're going to get ignored or you're going to get flamed, because the people who do volunteer to answer questions, they have a lot of stuff to go through, and they can sometimes get very impatient with people who do not take the time to do the research first. So beware of that. And that kind of leads into the next thing that I put here, which is be kind, courteous, and patient. You are dealing with a community when you're working with Linux. If you're asking for help with Linux, then you're asking a community. Linux is not a corporation. It is not like asking for help with Windows. It is very much frowned upon to come into any Linux forum and start complaining about Linux. Don't do it. You might be able to get away with that with Windows or Mac because everybody likes to stick it to the man, you know, and the big corporation, and oh, this sucks and I can't believe that I have to do this. If you come into a Linux forum and you have that sort of language, or if you contact somebody who is offering help like I do, and you're going to spend a great deal of your time berating Linux or saying that it's frustrating and stupid, then that's not going to make people want to help you. Don't do it. So be kind, courteous, and patient. I have worked with some clients that I have gotten, these are people that actually approached me for one-on-one support. I know that there was one fellow that I worked with one time, and the entire time I was on the phone, he was telling me how much this sucked and how much he didn't like it. And I finally just stopped the conversation and I said, look, you're not ready to use Linux. What you want to do is something that is not easy to do. He wanted to do, I can't even remember the details of it. And I just stopped him and said, look, I said, I don't think you're a candidate to be using Linux. If you come in with a negative attitude to begin with, then you're going to get negative back from it. You get out of Linux what you put into Linux, and there is a learning curve, and it takes time to learn this stuff. Linux is not Windows, it is not Mac. If you expect it to work that way, then you're going to be very, very frustrated. So be kind, courteous, and patient as you go through your journey. Be ready to edit text files. Be ready to open up a terminal, because a lot of the help that you're going to get in a forum, people are going to ask you to edit a text file, find a text file, and copy and paste it so they can see what's going on. And the solution that you get is probably going to be things that you're going to do at a command line. That's the way it works. I know that there are people out there who go, using a terminal is ancient technology and I shouldn't have to do that. And many of the easy to use distributions of Linux, like Linux Mint, they have made it a point and click affair. But if you're having a problem with it, this is how you're going to get solutions to your problems. It is a lot easier for me when I'm working with somebody to send them a list of commands, or even write them a script and send it to them and say, here, run this in your terminal, than it would be for me to go say, well, open this program and look for this window and this box down here. Is that checked? Is that clicked? Because there's so much confusion with that. If I send you commands, if I ask for you to send me information, a configuration file, then I'm getting a very direct and rigid way of seeing what's going on, and if you do what I tell you to do, it should work. So be ready to work in a terminal, be ready to edit text files. I have a video up that gives you a crash course in working with the terminal. So if you are brand new to Linux, I would suggest that you look at it. I'm going to put the link to that video in the description below, and if you watch that video, you will at least have the very basics you need to be able to find files on the system. You will understand the file system and the paths and stuff like that. So if you do need to ask for help and somebody says, go get this file or edit this file, you'll have some clue what they're talking about. And that is just the nature of the system. The terminal and the shell are a huge part of Linux, and I think they will always be a huge part of Linux. They're not going anywhere, so get friendly with it. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to memorize 10,000 commands, but just having a basic idea of how to get around, that helps a lot. And one of the things that I think is very important is that you limit the time you spend trying to fix a problem, because some people will run into some little issue and then they'll get themselves very, very frustrated, and they will poke at it for 2 or 3 hours. Honestly, if you don't get an answer to a problem within 20 or 30 minutes, then you need to walk away from it. If it is something that is absolutely mission critical, if you're doing this in a business, then at that point is when you reach out for help. That's when you would call in somebody to come and help you deal with it. You may even be prepared to pay some money to get somebody who, will come and look at this problem for you. If you're in a business, you want to have some sort of local IT person, whatever. But if you're a home user, it still applies. Limit your time. Give yourself a set time to work on a problem, and if you can't find the answer, walk away, take a break, rethink it, start looking for other solutions. Especially if you're trying to get some particular piece of software to work that doesn't work. If you want to do something with Linux, there's usually about 10 applications out there that will get it done. So if you're working on one and it's not working out and you can't configure it, you just may have run into a bad piece of software. And at that point, you want to go out and do some research and say, hey, I was trying to use, Tweedle to twiddle these files, but it doesn't. Are there other solutions? And in the forums, you're going to find people who are talking about that sort of issue all the time, and they will come up with alternate solutions. So stop yourself. Don't get yourself too involved. Don't get yourself so frustrated. Now, the problem that you're working on might be something that could be solved by reinstalling the system, especially if you are just starting out. Let's say that you have a junk computer and you install Linux Mint on it, Linux Lite, Ubuntu, whatever distribution it is, and it comes up and it won't boot properly, or it doesn't work, or whatever. You can spend a great deal of time trying to track down those problems. A lot of the time, what will fix that problem is just to start over. I do this with clients all the time. It's a matter of trial and error sometimes. Something might go wrong in the install, and there's your problem. That's it right there. And you do it one more time, and now everything works. Installing an operating system, regardless of what OS it is, whether it be Windows or Linux or Mac or Unix or whatever you happen to be working with, is a very complex process. And sometimes the installer just makes a mistake or something crashes. Going back and reinstalling it again, it might work perfectly this time. And this is usually a problem with video cards a lot. I've noticed that the drivers don't install properly and people try and boot into it and they don't get it. Go back and do it again. Go through the process one more time. It only takes 20 minutes to install most Linux distributions anyway, unless you're doing Arch by hand or something like that, or Linux from scratch or whatever. So it's not that big a deal. I mean, you could very easily spend 2 hours trying to fix an issue that would be fixable just by reinstalling. And that's true with programs too. If you're having problems with applications, you may be sitting there and it's going, this thing's not working, this thing's not working. Reinstall the program. Remove it and then reinstall it, and sometimes that fixes the problem. It could just be a bit of bad code in the program. And then finally, the last thing is that it may be a hardware problem, and I am surprised at how many people I run into who come to me with problems and they say, well, my sound doesn't work, or my video doesn't work properly, or the computer runs for 10 or 15 minutes and then it locks up, it's overheating, that sort of thing. And then I'll say, okay, well, do you get any error messages? And they'll be like, no, and this other thing. And then I'll ask them, I'll say, is this a computer that you ran Windows on? And they'll say yes. And then they'll say, and I'll ask and I'll say, well, did you have the same problem with Windows? And they'll say, yeah, but I thought Linux was going to fix this, and it didn't. Well, that tells me immediately that it's not a software issue. It's a hardware problem. The hardware in your computer is not infallible. And especially with laptops run hot, so all this stuff is getting hot all the time, and when electronics gets hot, there's a chance that it might fail. And laptops get jostled around, they get moved around, they get bumped. Little solder connections might be wonky, they might break. You might run into a situation where a particular card in your laptop is acting up, like the video or the Wi-Fi or something like that, and this is why you can't do this. It's not going to make any difference whether you're on Linux or what distribution of Linux you're on, or Windows or whatever you load onto the machine. It's still going to be a problem. And figuring out whether a problem is with hardware or software is actually very difficult, because it may be something in the driver, which is software, and that's easy to fix, or it may be something in the hardware. And if you run into those types of situations, especially with Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi can be very difficult to get working on a laptop sometimes, and it could be the card itself has a problem. And the quickest solution to that would be to go and get a dongle that you can plug into the side, a USB dongle, and use that for your Wi-Fi for that particular laptop, and that solves the problem. And there are tons of them out there that work natively with Linux. You don't have to go get drivers, you don't have to install anything, you don't have to tweak anything. You can just plug this thing in and it works. So that might be the simplest or easy solution. And that's true with printers as well. People will sit there and they will try and get a printer to work on Linux that's not very well supported by the manufacturer. And the simplest solution to that usually is just go buy another printer. They're dirt cheap. And if you buy most modern HP printers, you plug them in, they work directly with Linux. You don't have to download a driver. You don't have to wait for nothing. Just plug it in, go to the printer app, add, bang, pops up, configures itself, especially on Linux Mint. So if you're dealing with a hardware issue, you're going to have to fix the hardware, which is usually more expensive than just buying new hardware. So keep that in mind, especially if you're doing this as a project. If you have a laptop that's any computer that's 5 or years more old, you may run into things that are starting to fail. It's just after these things are used after a while, they start doing weird things. So keep that in mind as well. You may be dealing with a hardware issue, at which point getting new hardware is going to be the answer. So thank you for watching the video. I do appreciate it, and sorry about the background noise, gang. That's something I'm just dealing with every time I sit down to do this, is when them boys over there crank this up and they start running that thing. and they need to just hurry up and get it done, or I need to move, one of the two. I don't know which. For more about Linux, check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook if you're a Facebook user. And if you do, give it a like. I certainly would appreciate that. Also, check out freedompenguin.com for lots of really cool stories about Linux, and all kinds of good how-to and basic information pops up on that site. I do occasionally contribute to freedompenguin.com. I haven't done that in a little while, but some of my articles are still up there, and that is a really cool organization. So thanks for watching. We will do it again soon.